I've noticed over the decades, I think, the Libertarian Party has had the tendency to outreach, market to conservatives, almost solely, it seems to me. And it's been my experience personally that so many of those conservatives will take about 80% what we talk about, and then there's a block. There's a block at pornography and prostitution and drug laws and that sort of thing, to say nothing about foreign policy. And I'm not to say we shouldn't try to get conservatives, but I don't think there has been an adequate, a sufficient amount of effort to outreach to what we would consider the left side of the spectrum, the progressives. And it's my opinion that if we would do so, we might find out if we can just teach them a little economics, they'll be right with us. Our next speaker is associated with a website called Bleeding Heart Libertarians, and he blogs on there quite often. And I think he is doing a great job, I think, to entice and bring libertarian solutions, if you will, to progressives. Steve Horwitz is a professor at St. Lawrence University and department head there, and author of I don't have this memorized, but it's on the program. Micro Foundations and Macroeconomics in Austrian Perspective. He's an Austrian economist. And also I'd like to say that he is the most accessible libertarian star, if you will, on the internet. You can friend him on Facebook, and he responds personally. Just a great personal guy besides being a great economist. So I'd like to welcome to the Libertarian Party of Illinois, Dr. Steve Horwitz.
Well, good morning. We'll use my loud professor voice. We'll see what the microphone does too. It's a pleasure to be here for a variety of different reasons. I have to say your convention committee did a great job. The lineup of speakers this weekend was amazing, and Bob Murphy and I crossed paths yesterday afternoon on his way out and my way in, and we were joking. We were saying, it's a good thing that he had to leave, and just as I was coming, because if anything bad happened, then only one of us goes down this weekend. So if both of us goes down, that's a problem. So again, thank you for having me. And as Ken said, my title is Engaging Progressives with Libertarian Solutions. As Ken said, if we could only teach them a little bit of economics, well, there's a lot packed into that phrase. That is a difficult task. And the talk could go in two directions this morning. I could spend my time talking about the issues that we're likely to agree on with progressives, with folks on the left. And those are, again, I think those are things we should be talking about them. We can always work on those. Foreign policy, well, at least until Obama was president, anyway. And social issues, of course, too. We can talk about same-sex marriage. We can talk about abortion. We can talk about gay rights. The LP, of course, had a gay rights platform in 1980, long before we were the hipsters of gay rights, long before anyone else thought it was cool. We were talking about it. We could talk to the left about those things, and I think it is useful to do. Of course, libertarians don't always agree on those issues as well. But what I really want to talk about this morning are engaging progressives with the ideas of free market economics. How do we talk to people on the left about market solutions to social problems? And in particular, what I want to focus on is how do we get them to take seriously our solutions to the kinds of problems they're concerned about. And that's, as Ken mentioned, I blog at bleedingheartlibertarians.com. And one of the things that the folks there, while we all have different understandings of what that phrase means, one of the things I think that we all agree on is that libertarians have a unique opportunity to talk to people on the left and to argue, again, that our ideas, our solutions are solutions to problems that we agree with them about, that are problems. We agree on what the problems are. We simply have different solutions. And so the question I want to really address this morning is how do we then engage with progressive critics of the market? Are there better ways to get them into conversations and perhaps move them a little bit? So I want to do this in two parts. I'm going to start with some kind of general principles or guidelines, or maybe rhetorical strategies might be a good thing to think about. And then the second half of the talk, I'll turn and talk about some specific issues on which I think we can do this and how we might go about doing so. So let me first talk about some of what I call the guidelines or the strategies. The first, and I think most important, I've already kind of suggested at, which is make it about means, not about ends. One of the difficulties we frequently have when we talk to folks on the left is that they want to argue that we as libertarians don't care about X, right? We don't care about solving poverty. We don't care about racism. We don't care about inequality. We don't, whatever it might be, pick your thing. We don't care about it. And I think we have to put a stop to that. And we can do that by insisting over and over that no, we do care about those things. What we differ about is how best to address them, or in some cases, we can talk about what the exact nature of the problem is. To put that another way, I think it's really important that we do not cede the moral high ground when we are in discussions with people on the left. We have just as much of a claim as they do to caring about those issues that they care about, many of them anyway, and we shouldn't allow them to pin us in the corner of saying you don't care or this isn't important to you. It is, and it has been. I have another talk, you can find it out on the internet somewhere, where I talk about classical liberalism, libertarianism's progressive heritage. And I talk about the idea that we, as libertarians, were the original progressives in the 19th century. We got displaced by socialism in that role, but that's our heritage, right? We were the left of the 19th century. And we should not be afraid today to invoke that as we talk with our friends on the left. Another guideline, another suggestion, of course, is I think you have to be as educated on the issues as you can be. You need to know theory, and particularly, you need to know history. I think one of the places where the left and libertarians disagree often is their interpretation of historical events. Just as one example, think about the Great Depression and how we see the Great Depression differently. So I think it's really important for us, to the degree that we're able to be conversant with the world of ideas and be conversant with those arguments and be able to draw on them. One of the things I tell my students today, particularly when I talk to young libertarians, is I remind them how easy they have it today. When I was in college in the early 80s, if a professor said something or I was in a debate with another student about an issue, and I knew in my heart, right, I was a libertarian when I was 16, so I went to college already ready to roll. So you know that they're not right about this, but you're thinking to yourself, oh, I really wish I could find the right arguments. And you have to go to the library and find an article or a book. Today, pull out your smartphone. The world is at your fingertips. You ought to be able to make really effective arguments when you're in conversation with folks, and investing a little bit of time in, if not knowing them, knowing where to find them, I think is really important. Another bit of strategy, I think, that sometimes a trap that we sometimes fall into, is we end up in arguments where we're debating our imperfect world with their perfect world. And that is something we really need to avoid as well. It's very easy to, look, markets are messy, right? The free markets aren't going to give us a beautiful, perfect utopia where everyone's breath smells good and all these sorts of things, right? They're imperfect. It takes time for markets to adjust. People make mistakes. We're human beings. And oftentimes, we get into these debates where we're admitting that, right? But then we're up against this sort of, well, if government would step in and do X, Y, and Z, we'd solve this problem. All right? I think that's a strategy or a trap we have to avoid. And one way to avoid it is to remember that just because people describe a particular government solution doesn't mean that government solution is actually going to play out the way they said it would. All right? There is a whole school of thought in economics that comes out of the 1950s and 1960s, out of the work of particular the economist James Buchanan, Nobel Prize winner, who just passed away actually earlier this year, public choice theory. Okay? And public choice theory, what public choice theory did was to counter all of these discussions about how markets supposedly fail with the observation that, well, wait a second, governments can fail too. Not a surprise to anyone in this room. Okay? But in economic theory, this was an important sort of innovation. And my favorite way, when I teach this, my favorite story is, and one that people who talk about this use a lot, is imagine you have a king, right? And the king wants to audition a new court singer to come and be the official royal singer. And so think American Idol or whatever, right? So the king sends his people out through the land to find the best singers possible, and they finally bring back to the court, to the castle, the 2 best singers they think are out there in the kingdom. And the king says, well, I want to hear the 2 of them sing so I can decide myself. And the first person gets up to sing and finishes, and the king says, that was terrible. That's the worst singing I ever heard, and immediately appoints the other guy as royal singer. Okay? Now, obviously, what's the problem here? Could be worse. He could be worse, right? And so this is when we get into these discussions, right, we have to remember that, right, just because markets don't do things perfectly all the time, every minute, right, government could be worse. And we certainly have plenty of examples of that where regulators, where various, though it's hardly a free market, right, the way in which our healthcare system is highly imperfect, but Lord knows Obamacare is not going to do any better. Just saw a story this morning that Home Depot is cutting their health benefits to 20,000 of their part-time workers and saying, go fend for yourself on those exchanges, thank you very much, right? Didn't some guy once say, if you like your plan, you can keep it? I thought I heard that somewhere. So look, I mean, we have to recognize the way in which governments, whatever the imperfections of markets are, governments have way more, and we have to be able to talk about the imperfections of government as equally with the imperfections of markets. We can't be led into that trap. And insisting that it's the same human beings, right? You've had this conversation where someone says, oh, the people who run corporations are terrible human beings and they're self-interested. What exactly happens to them when they become politicians? Do they magically transform into these angelic people? Right? It's the same people. The question is, under which system will bad people do the least harm? Right? It's not that it's not that CEOs are all great, wonderful people, but they exist in a world of competition that forces them to do what we want them to do as their customers, whether they like to or not. Their self-interest is channeled into providing for the public, for providing public benefits by the nature of market competition. Political systems don't work that way, right? Self-interested politicians end up giving us $16 trillion in debt and bombing 6, 8, however many countries we're bombing right now. So we have to be able to talk about those things and to show and have examples of the way in which the best intentions of political actors have led to terrible results, because good intentions are neither necessary nor sufficient to generate good outcomes when we're talking about the political realm. So when we're in conversation with progressives, I think we have to continue to hammer home the point that that the solutions they imagine will work on paper or on the blackboard or whatever, simply in reality won't. And one of the reasons is again, because we have to recognize that the people who will be implementing those solutions, the political actors, are just as self-interested as people are in the marketplace, yet they exist in a world where self-interest doesn't lead to good outcomes the way it does in a genuine profit-seeking competitive marketplace. And I think the fact that many people on the left will recognize that in some vague sense politicians are self-interested, at least the ones they don't like. And I think that's a point we can grab onto and work with. I think another point, and boy, this one in the last decade is a huge one, and I think both left and right have missed this, which is the power that you want to create for your government solutions will not always be yours. What happens when it falls into the wrong hands, right? And now we have, the conservatives complaining about Obama using executive power to take us to war without consent of Congress. Wait, yeah, wait. When have I heard this before, right? And now we have, of course, the left saying, well, if Obama thinks it's a good thing to go bomb the Syrians, he should have the right. To the hell with Congress, he should. Right? Okay, so you can play gotcha games with this all the time, but I think there's an important, political point under this, which is just because your guys are in charge today doesn't mean they're going to be in charge today or tomorrow. And the very same power you think, I think wrongly, right? Progressives think wrongly, can be used for good intentions today, will be used by the other side for things even the progressives don't like next time. And so really focusing on the creation of that power and the fact that once you put structures of power in place that enable the executive to act unilaterally, just as one example, or when you create regulatory structures, they don't go away. One of the most best books, if you want to read a terrific book on sort of 20th century American economic history, Bob Higgs' book, Crisis and Leviathan, is a terrific book on 20th century American history. And one of the themes of Bob's book is that he talks about the way a government grows during a crisis, that we all know, but then he points out that when the crisis is over, government shrinks, but only a little bit. It never goes back to where it was before the crisis. And the institutions and the policies that are created during a crisis have staying power. They stick, and they never go away. And we're still dealing with institutions created, say, during World War I and the Great Depression, World War II, and Lord knows after 9/11, right? This is, of course, the problem with the war on terrorism, is that it will never pass. And we're, I think, unfortunately, or at least I hope we're not, but we're certainly going to be stuck with those institutions for a while, although some of the pushback now on the NSA and so forth, I think, has been somewhat reassuring. And that, we might note, is a set of issues where we can talk to the left as well. I think another kind of rhetorical strategy we have to be careful about is to not let the perfect be the enemy of the better. It's okay for us in conversation with our friends on the left to say things, as I was noting before, that markets aren't perfect, that liberty won't create utopia. No system will create utopia. We're human beings. There always will be, there's always a problem to be solved. We need to shift the discussion from what will give us the perfect outcome to what kind of institutions help us learn from our mistakes. And one of the great things about markets, about free market economies, is people who make mistakes, if you come out with a product that nobody likes, okay, you'll hear about it quickly, right? Profits and losses are very powerful signals and very powerful incentives that enable us to learn from our mistakes in very important ways. And even in the nonprofit sector, if you are a charitable organization who doesn't do what your donors want, they'll stop giving you money. The public sector doesn't work this way, right? Politicians don't learn from their mistakes. The evidence of that is abundant. And the feedback mechanisms within the political system simply aren't there. And so I think one of the things that we can do when we talk to people on the left is to make this point and to ask them, how often do politicians learn from their mistakes? And it doesn't seem to matter who the politicians are. It's not a left-right question. It's built into the very structure of the system. And I think the more that we can emphasize those kinds of arguments, I think the better luck that we'll have. There is certainly a segment of the progressive left that, and we've seen it with the Obama presidency, that has a kind of, there's a kind of cult of personality element to it. I don't know if that's too strong or not, I don't think it is, in which, sort of believing that their guy can do no wrong. And we might not be able to crack those folks, but I think other folks, and you're seeing it in some of the conversation in the last 6 months or a year, recognizing that in the case of Obama, like, hey, all of a sudden, he's starting to look like just another politician. We knew that. Most people knew that. But even the people sympathetic to him, I think, are seeing that. And young people, from what I've seen from some of the polling numbers, young people have begun to abandon him. And this is not a major theme this morning, but footnote, there's our opportunity, right? There is an opportunity for us. There are going to be a lot of disaffected young Obama voters who voted for him, I suspect, because to some social issues for one, war, foreign policy issues for another, and young people who are not necessarily don't have deep ideological objections to the market. They're there for the picking, I think, if we can find them, okay, and if we can find the right kind of ways to reach out to them. A lot of the young people involved with Students for Liberty or Young Americans for Liberty, right, that I know are sort of disaffected, folks who in 2007 and 2008 were kind of gung-ho about Obama, got disaffected, and somehow got connected with libertarian ideas and realized, hey, you know what, this is what this sounds more right than what I've seen that guy do since he's been in office. So I think there's a big opportunity for the LP and for other libertarian organizations. One other piece of advice, don't think you have to turn leftists into anarcho-capitalists in one conversation. Okay?
Why not?
There's lots of desirable goals. But if you hold that one up, you're going to find yourself failing. Pick your battles, pick the issues you think that you can converse with them most productively, and one step at a time. That's how you got here, I'm willing to bet. It wasn't one 30-minute conversation over a beer. It was an accretion of things over time. And I can think of friends of mine who are on the left who, by finding the things I think they're most interested in, you can move them one step at a time. Because if you can change someone in 30 minutes over a beer, the next guy can change them right back, okay? And so you have to see it as a longer-term project. I think it's also important to avoid demonizing people on the left and right, and sort of making everyone who disagrees with libertarians into either being stupid or evil. Some are, okay? Some are, but most people are pretty smart and good-hearted, but often ignorant, and I mean that in the literal sense of the word. That's, go back to Ken's introduction. There's the educational opportunity that I think we have. But we do have to be careful of making everyone who disagrees with us seem evil or stupid. I also, this is a pet thing of mine, but I also think conspiracy theory type talk is just not a good strategy. I think it's wrong, but it's also not a good strategy. I've spent a career writing about the Federal Reserve System, and I can tell you, there are plenty of really, really good reasons to get rid of the Fed. That it's run by Jews or the lizard people are not among them. I know, sorry to disappoint you if you thought either one was a good reason, but neither one is, all right? So again, I think we have to be careful, and I think we can call out progressives on their inconsistencies. And conservatives too. But the productive way to do it is to keep arguing that our policies will better serve their concerns, not by saying that they don't care or that they're stupid. If we don't want to be called carrying unsensitive tools of the corporations, we need to stop calling other people Stalinists and fascists. And in fact, I'm on a pet thing about this, I think the word statist is not productive either. It doesn't say anything, it just upsets people like even people on the left don't think of themselves as worshiping the state. And I think they're right. They don't worship it. They think it solves problems. I think they're wrong. Okay? But sort of that word statist is a conversation ender, not a starter. Another strategy is to find things that the left does agree with and analogize from them. I love evolutionary examples. I love talking about markets as evolutionary systems. I like to point out to my friends on the left that if they don't think intelligent design explains the natural world, why would they think it explains the social world? And that if we think that the undesigned forces of nature can produce desirable complexity, why can't social institutions? So I think that's another kind of strategy. I think we also have to avoid victim blaming. We can say to our friends on the left, we, like you, are looking for structural explanations of things like poverty, right? So for example, we as libertarians might think that cultural and behavioral traits of people are not irrelevant for understanding poverty. Most poverty can be explained by government interventions that have stacked the deck against lower skilled workers through labor market regulation, terrible public schools, or the drug war, okay? And I think we need to point that out, that it's not flaws in people as much as it is bad policies and counterproductive government interventions. And as libertarians, we might actually consider whether some of those cultural attitudes that we think help explain poverty aren't themselves the product, a long-term result of decades of those counterproductive anti-poverty programs. If we think people don't work hard enough, poor people don't work hard enough, maybe it's because we've had these policies that have continually rewarded them for not working very hard, right? Or, better yet, made it really difficult for them to find jobs and to gain a work ethic, and so on. Focusing on the policies, not the people. And last of my sort of strategic advice, and certainly not least, don't forget civil society. This is not, the debate with left and right, but especially the left, is not just about markets versus government. Libertarians do, or at least should, recognize the myriad ways in which non-market voluntary social institutions are a key component of a free society. Whether it's churches, synagogues, and mosques, whether it's friendly societies, traditional charities, Kickstarter, or other web-based stuff, whatever it is, we have a habit of using the term the market as a shorthand for all voluntary social institutions. But when we're talking to progressives, that's a real problem, because I think it's important to make this distinction between markets and civil society, because we don't want to fall into this trap of arguing markets are the answer to everything, because they're not, number one, in the strict sense of the word markets. But when we do that, people on the left just hear profit, greed, corporation, ExxonMobil, right? I mean, all the bad stereotypes come up when we use markets. It's true that they misunderstand that, all right? But why shut the conversation down from the start? We need to talk about those other kinds of institutions and the way in which they play a role as part of our solutions. You know, you've had this conversation, then they say, well, charity can't certainly solve all poverty problems. No, it can't. I'll talk about that in a second. But at least we have to recognize that those are part of the solution as well. Okay? We need, as libertarians, we need civil society. We need those non-market voluntary social institutions. Okay? So, There's some strategic advice. What are some issues that we might raise? I have a bunch. I think right now, perhaps other than foreign policy, again, depends, probably the one that I'd like to see us be talking about the most is crony capitalism. And the way in which I think we can engage folks on the left in what should be our mutual opposition to crony capitalism. Because I don't think it's the case. I don't think it's the case that people on the left think, critics of markets think, that all acquisition of wealth is bad. I do think that they understand vaguely that it matters how it's obtained. Right? There they are, the critics, the hipster critics of capitalism, standing out in line in downtown Chicago yesterday waiting for their iPhone 5. Okay? So let's be clear here. They clearly have no problem with Apple stockholders and so forth, and Apple employees indirectly making lots of money by providing them with their iPhone 5 that they just can't wait to get their hands on. So I think we have to engage that conversation. I think we have to talk about the way in which real markets, real capitalism is about value creation and mutual benefit. That the way you get rich in a real market is by providing things that people want, by creating value for them. You give them value. You love your iPhone 5, don't you? They give you value. You give them income and wealth in return. That's the arrangement. And by their own behavior, it suggests that they understand that. And I think we need to talk about that. I think then we also need to talk about why the alternative is such a problem, right? Why, when we get into a world where people make profits through their political connections, and it remains the best thing ever written on this subject is the chapter from Atlas Shrugged on the aristocracy of pull. If you know Rand and know Atlas Shrugged, that chapter is a beautiful description of the world, frankly, that we seem to be in right now, where how one gets rich and how one gets power is by who one knows, not by creating value for the public, for the common person. And I think that's another point we can hit on here too, right? Is that in a real market, you create money, you create wealth, you get wealthy by improving the lives of the masses. That's what you do. We're better off with our iPhones and all the other stuff that we have. Under crony capitalism, right, who are you pleasing? Not the mass of people. You're pleasing the politicians. You're pleasing the political actors. So we can talk with the left about things like corporate welfare, about TARP and the bank bailouts. We can talk about the problems with other kinds of subsidies and so forth. One area that's particularly ripe for this is agricultural subsidies. Most lefties really hate ag subsidies. They hate it for two reasons. One, environmental reasons, and we can agree, right, that to the degree that we overfarm and so on, that's a problem. But they also hate it because our subsidies tend to shut out third world farmers from being able to compete in the marketplace. As libertarians, we should be right on that, saying yes, absolutely. There's no reason why American agricultural policies should favor rich American farmers over poor third world farmers. And by the way, that's a general rule about foreign aid. You know the line about foreign aid? Foreign aid redistributes money from poor people in rich countries to rich people in poor countries. Okay? So, we're paying more for our food, so bureaucrats in the places that get our foreign aid can do what they want to do. So I think that's more. Another point I think that we can make is to not fall into the trap of them thinking we think bigger's always better, right? And oftentimes corporations become big and powerful because they've been subsidized, because the state's been involved. And I think we can agree with them, say, yeah, that's a problem, right? We've got now these banks that are quote unquote too big to fail. One big reason is that we keep them alive, right? By these, by all the subsidies and so on that's happened since 2008. There's an interesting literature going on right now, or some people have argued that crony capitalism is a cause of growing inequality. And that the ability to get rich through political connections has widened the income gap. There's a wonderful Louise Zingali's book, now I'm blank, I should have wrote the title down, Capitalism for the People, I think it's called. There's an interesting version of this argument. So again, then how do we deal with this in these conversations with our friends on the left? I think we have to make the case that when the state intervenes, this is what happened. If the pot of gold is there for the private sector to get those subsidies and convince politicians to bail them out, they will do it. It doesn't matter who's in office. It doesn't matter who the corporate leaders are. If the money's there, if the power's there, they will go after it. I coined what is now known as Horwitz's first law of political economy, which is no one hates capitalism more than the capitalists. right? And by that I mean they're the ones who are often going to the state to ask for these monopolies and subsidies and regulations and so on. If the power's there, if you're concerned about corporate power, right, take away that, if we shrink the state, there's a lot less stuff for corporations to grab onto and lock into. If you've got that subsidy from government, that's not like having a temporary, profit in the marketplace. Look what's happened to BlackBerry, right? The newspaper story over the weekend about they may be on their last legs. They were once the kings of the smartphone, email, cell phone world, and now they're going on to, why? Because they got outcompeted by better products. And I think we can make the point that corporate power, quote unquote, in a free market is only as temporary, lasts only as long as we give it to them by buying their products. A second issue that I hope we can talk to our friends on the left about is the war on drugs, or the war on some users of some drugs, as I like to call it. I think one way to go at this, we can talk about freedom of choice and victimless crime and the right to use your body the way you want, which resonates with many on the left. That's important too. But I also think we can talk about the kind of collateral effects that the war on drugs has had. For one, the disproportionate racial impact, especially what it's done to urban areas. The war on drugs has decimated African American neighborhoods and families, perhaps more than anywhere else. I have a colleague at my university who likes to talk about this a lot, an African-American colleague, and he says, when it comes to the war on drugs, if you go down to the courthouse, there's no justice, just us. And I think he's got that right, okay? If you look at who gets convicted and the rates of conviction, my friend Dan D'Amico, who some of you may have seen some of his work on the internet, Dan has done great work on the disproportionate racial impact of war on drugs and prison populations and so on. We need to be talking about this, and we need to be making this argument, particularly in conversation with the left. Privacy issues, okay? As I suggested, the NSA pushback is a good sign, but boy, the war on drugs has shredded the Fourth Amendment, among others, okay? And when you put the war on drugs together with anti-terrorism and anti-immigrant policies, the Fourth Amendment has again been eviscerated. And at least leftist progressives tend to pay lip service to that, and I think we need to engage them on it. I live near the Canadian border, and some of you may be familiar with the law that allows the Border Patrol to set up roadblocks within 100 miles of the border. So I often will be driving on US 11 from Watertown to my hometown, and they'll have roadblocks set up, and basically, they'll just sometimes just look in your car and you go on. Sometimes they'll, ask you, do you have proof of citizenship with you, which is an interesting question 100 miles, inside the border. This stuff is really nasty, and what they're looking for. And by the way, if you want to really make your day, go out on YouTube and search for these videos where people have refused to allow their cars to be searched at these stops. They're awesome. Right, these people standing up to the cops and asserting their but just a piece of advice, okay? If you ever stop by one of these stops, the ACLU, whatever you think of them, God love them on this one, right? Says you should only be saying three things: am I free to go? Am I being detained? Am I free to go? I do not consent to any searches. That's all you have to say, okay? And they can do nothing at those border stops without probable cause. Those videos there's some heroic Americans in those videos standing up to power. And I think this is an issue where we can work with the left as well. Radley's work, the whole warrior cop phenomenon. I mean, Radley, I can only imagine the talk he gave. His work is brilliant, and it's among the most important work that libertarian journalists are doing right now. The fact that Watertown, New York has about 20,000 people. They just bought a used one, from Jim's used tank lot, I guess. They bought one of these used military vehicles. And what's interesting is that the local newspaper has editorialized against it, saying, what do we need this? We have real crime on the streets. What do we need this thing for? Right, which is a good, hopeful sign. But when Main Street USA has become militarized in this way, thanks mostly to the war on drugs, that's an issue we should be talking about. The drug legalization should be a progressive libertarian alliance without question. Another set of issues we should be talking about, I think, are labor market regulation. And again, its effects on groups that progressives claim to speak for. I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but the history of a lot of labor market regulation, things like minimum wage, occupational licensure laws, the kind of privileges that unions have, these things grew out of early 20th century racism, sexism, and xenophobia. These laws were designed to target minorities and women. If you look at, and by the way, designed by whom? Early 20th century self-described progressives. If you look at the history of minimum wage legislation, it was designed by white folks to shut out of the market people who were thought to be inferior. Often that was non-white folks, but even white folks who were not thought to be capable, right? The idea was if we had a minimum wage law, they couldn't get jobs and they would fail to thrive and have children and wouldn't reproduce. There's a deep connection between those laws and early 20th century eugenics. If you Google Horwitz progressive eugenics, you'll find a piece of mine with my friend Art Carden, who you also may know from some videos and other stuff he's done, that looks at some of this history. We have to, I think when we're talking with folks on the left, we have to be careful about this because we don't want to say, see, you're just like those nasty eugenicists were 100 years ago, because that's not going to go anywhere. But I think what we can say is there's a reason people like that supported these laws. They understood correctly that minimum wage laws shut lower skilled workers out of the bottom of the income ladder, out of the entry-level jobs in the marketplace. And to the extent that lower skilled workers are disproportionately, say, non-white, perhaps inner city public schools don't do a very good job, we're shutting out opportunities for the folks we care about more. Why are black poverty rates so high? Right? There's one, and unemployment rates so high. Minimum wage laws are one reason. Occupational licensure laws is another. So one of the things I think we can do when we're in conversation with the left is to talk about ways of freeing up those labor markets, trying to get rid of those laws. They're tough conversations. The licensure laws are easier conversations than the minimum wage law thing because that involves some more complicated economics sometimes. But to insist that what we want to do is to create opportunities for lower skilled workers. And two resources I'll point you to here. If you don't know the work of the Institute for Justice, you should. A marvelous the public interest libertarian law firm in DC who argues these kind of cases, these economic regulation cases. You might have heard the one about the casket makers in Louisiana, right? IJ was behind that. When I do these summer seminars for young libertarian college students, we say, what do you want to do? I want to be an IJ lawyer. I want to be an IJ lawyer, right? Because that's cool stuff. But IJ is great. One you might not know of, I'm going to put a plug for my friend Sean Malone's film here. It's a short documentary that my friend Sean Malone directed called No Vans Land, like vans that you drive, right? It's the story of these van operators in New York City who are competing against the taxi cab monopoly and and how, very heroic story of how they got around these government regulations. Again, all immigrant and minority owned, and it's a maybe 15-minute long film, little documentary. If you Google No Vans Land, you can find it. Terrific. One last point about this set of issues. I think we sometimes make a mistake, particularly in conversation with the left, by leaping right to let's get rid of welfare programs. Right? We got to get rid and we can give all the reasons why they're terrible, and they are. Okay? But I think the mistake is the following. I think before we have that conversation, we need to have the conversation about how do we create more opportunities for the very people who are being harmed because they have no other option but to be on state assistance, right? We can't start, if you kick someone in the shins and break their leg, right, and don't take away their crutches, okay, right? You got to help them get right first before you take away the crutches that you've given them because you've created these lack of opportunities in the first place. So I think there's a sequence here that says, at least whether it's the right political sequence, that's your job to figure out, all right? But intellectually, for me, right, it makes more sense to engage the conversation by saying, okay, let's talk about how we create opportunities to bring down the 42% unemployment rate among black teenagers. Let's talk about the ways in which we create opportunities for more entry-level work. Let's do all of those things. Then, once we've dealt with that, get rid of the war on drugs, right? Once we do all that stuff, then we can start to talk in additional ways about how we want to shrink the welfare state. One reason is we just won't need it as much anymore if we create the opportunities in the first place, right? The dependency, welfare state dependency we talk about is as much a product of all that other government intervention as it is anything else. So I think that's another conversation that we have to be careful how we have that conversation. Last topic I'll mention is with progressives who claim to take civil liberties and war seriously, I think it can be helpful to talk about their connection, the connection between those issues and the connection to economic issues. For example, you want government to run your healthcare system. How is it not going to invade your privacy? How is it not going to force awful rationing decisions that give government power? whatever else you want to say about our friend Sarah Palin, okay, and whether the term death panels was a good choice of words or not, she was right, okay? She was right. And she was right about, and we're going to see it, the fact that you will now, bureaucrats, Obamacare bureaucrats, are going to have to make decisions about who gets resources and who doesn't. Death panels was not the most, as my friend of mine would say, the most rhetorically sensitive turns of phrase, okay, but the essential truth was there. And I think that's a conversation we can have. And our, really, you of all our progressive friends want to give, you who talked about the importance in another context of the doctor-patient relationship and about how decisions about women's health has to be made around the kitchen table, not by bureaucrats and male politicians. Now you're going to let those guys make all these other health decisions? Really? Okay. If you think abortion is a political football right now, just wait, okay? Because all of these medical decisions are going to become so highly politicized. And I think that's a conversation we can have, right? And the impact that all this is going to have on the First and Fourth Amendments on rights to privacy, rights to free speech, rights of association, right? When it's always true when the regulatory state grows, particularly when we talk about medical care. Another conversation we can have, we know this, sometimes the left even forgets it, a war is not good for the economy. Okay? World War II did not end the Great Depression, and despite what Paul Krugman thinks, an alien invasion would not be a good thing for the economy. And we can talk about why that is. Wars destroy things. Okay? Rebuilding after war or devoting resources to making things and blowing them up, that's not the creation of wealth. That's the creation of stuff, but it's not the creation of wealth. It's easy to create stuff. It's easy to create jobs, by the way, too, right? I'll just tell this story because I like to tell it. There's a famous story about, it's apocryphal, I think, about Milton Friedman, about an American economist who went to China on a tour, right? And the Chinese were showing him, we'll make it Milton Friedman because it's good that way. We're showing him around this new canal they were building. And they take him, and there's all these people with shovels digging out this canal. Friedman finally says to the guy, look, I got to ask you a question. You're building this huge canal. Why aren't you using earth movers? Why are you using shovels? And the Chinese guy says, well, he says, if we use earth movers, we wouldn't have as many jobs. And Friedman says, oh, it's a jobs creation program. I thought you were building a canal the most efficient way. He says, if it's a jobs creation program you want, take away their shovels, give them spoons. Okay? So look, creating jobs and creating stuff is easy. Creating value is hard. And I think this is a conversation, too, we can have with folks on the left. And the last one, and one close to my heart, is the historical connection between central banks and war. I like to call this free bankers for peace, all right? Which is almost every central bank that you can think of grew out of some need for government revenue, most frequently war. If you go back in American history, it's not coincidental that most of the major steps in which the federal government has intervened more in the money and financial system has been during times of war. Civil War, Fed, World War I, Great Depression, the moral equivalent of war, 1971 when we cut the last links to gold was during Vietnam. Why is that? Because, well, look, if you've got a war, especially an unpopular one, and you don't want to raise taxes to pay for it, and people won't buy bonds to pay for it, what do you got to do? You got to find another way, and gaining control over the monetary system allows you to use inflation and to manipulate the monetary system in ways that raise revenue. You can drive by the post office and honk your horn for peace, but it would do a lot more if we could shut down the Federal Reserve and shut down that ability to create funds out of nowhere and out of your savings to fund American military adventurism. And so I think that's another conversation we can have is this was an interesting thing in the Ron Paul campaign, right? Why is this guy talking about the gold standard and saying we ought to be out of other countries? That doesn't make sense. Oh, yes, it does, okay? And I think it's a conversation that we can have there too. So those are some issues. I think there's others. I'm going to stop in a bit and give you some time for questions. You can certainly raise other ones. But I think if we as libertarians seriously want to engage progressives, we need to make it clear that we agree with them on a number of the problems that they claim exist. And then we need to make it clear that our disagreement with them is about how best to solve them, not that the problems aren't important or that you don't care or that you don't have a good understanding of what the problems are. And then I think what we need to do is to lay out the libertarian solutions, including the ways in which government has caused the very problems for which we're now looking for solutions, right? We sometimes forget that too. And we need to explain why these solutions are not just about, I got mine, right? Or not just about, I have rights, but about actually solving the problems in question and improving the lives of those suffering from that state intervention. I can't guarantee this will work, but it's the best alternative we have. Treating the left as evil or stupid will enrage rather than engage. And treating them as smart and caring, but indicating that we differ on what constitutes the best solution to the problem, I think is the only way to go. And then we have to demand and expect that they will debate with us in the same good faith, right? And that we need to call people on the left when they fail to do that. When they start saying, oh, that's just racist, or you don't care about X, name it. Say, yeah, I do, okay? And you, once they start doing that, and if they won't stop, it's okay to walk away, okay? Because I think the more that we don't walk away from situations like that, the more we do get pissed off and then say stupid stuff. If our friends on the left are really open to engagement, all right, this is the way to go. And frankly, given the world we're living in 2013, given the expansion of the state and all the threats to human freedom and prosperity that are around us, we need all the allies we can get, and that means we do have to engage rather than enrage. So thank you all very much. And I'm happy to, we got about just under 15 minutes.
15,
I have a
maybe more,
flight,
if
so.
people want to stay and you want to stay.
Yeah, I'm happy to, take a few questions. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to take, we're going to do it since we're filming. We're going to do it here, and I'm going to take, again, the prerogative of asking the first question. Sorry. Oh, we actually do have power here now. I think that, libertarians, and to an extent, limited government conservatives, tend to use logic and reason. And progressives, I'm overgeneralizing, tend to use emotion. But if you win those hearts, and even if you were able somehow to connect emotionally with them, I found one other roadblock that's very difficult to handle. And that is that when they're cornered on those first two, then they say, well, I'm really not smart enough, the experts say that. It's the reliance of experts, I think, on those on the left more than any other group of people. They do rely, and I found, of course, it's really true with global warming science. And also, even, I've had my discussions with my friends on the left about the bailouts. Even TARP bailouts, even when Bush did it. Because they believed the experts said that the world was going to end if the super rich didn't get bailed out.
Yeah. One quick thing about that. My daughter recently took the Myers-Briggs test for the first time, and I was talking about it on Facebook. If you know Myers-Briggs, right, and I put it out on Facebook, I'm an ENTJ, which is like right, everyone knows Myers-Briggs, right? That's pretty, after 45 minutes, you could have figured that one out. Right, and we're like the executives. And it's that NT in the middle, intuition, thinking. Those are people who are sort of, logical, analytical. And I posted this on Facebook, and all my libertarian friends on Facebook started posting their Myers-Briggs, type, and almost every one of them is an NT in the middle. Okay, and libertarianism, I think, as Ken's question suggests, attracts people with that predisposition. And sometimes we have a difficult time with the left because they're less likely to be, and T's are more likely to have the F, which is feeling, instead of the T for thinking, right, in that third slot. So yeah, I think that is the Bleeding Heart Libertarian Project in some way is saying that libertarians need to recognize that we're T's talking to F's, right, that we're often talking to people who don't use the same frame of analysis that we do. As for the experts thing, I think it's a challenge because we are our position is one that's in the minority, right? And I think you have to, one way you can go with that, particularly with like the TARP stuff, is to say, those experts are so caught up in that world, and that the people who will benefit from this are the people they know and hang out with. Of course, they see the world through their eyes in a certain sort of way, and I think you can do that without saying, they're just tools, right? But that it's not. I mean, it's not surprising that Hank Paulson would, in September 2008, would sort of poke his head up, look around, and go, "Oh my God, all my buddies in the investment banking business are in trouble," right? That's the investment banking business is very important because I've spent 20 years at Goldman Sachs, right? It's not surprising he would think that and want to do something to help. So I think experts have their own biases, and I think the best we can do, frankly, is to plant those seeds of doubt. And you're not going to change in one conversation, but you can start to raise the questions and point. And I think it's important to point to other experts. There were plenty of free market economists who signed on to all kinds of petitions in the fall of 2008, arguing that this stuff was bad. You can point to that too. And if then they want to say, well, yeah, but those guys are tools of the Koch brothers or whomever, okay, fine, then you guys are tools of Goldman Sachs, which you want, right? I mean, okay, or tools of Buffett or Soros, right? So yeah, so I mean, we all can play that game, but once they want to play that game, then you're not, then it's hard to have a reasonable conversation then. So yeah.
I'd just like to get clarification on a couple of terms that you used. I guess I'm not familiar with them living in Waukesha County, which is the DuPage equivalent up in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Very conservative, right-wing organization. Over-farming, I don't get that.
Yeah,
and then the other one is, and I'll hand over the mic, you've called civil organizations like churches and other fraternal organizations not market, and I can't handle that.
Okay. Two things. The first, the over-farming thing, just that if we subsidize agriculture, we're going to get people growing stuff that we don't need, right? Because we're subsidizing. Any behavior we subsidize, we'll get more of. And so the idea of over-farming is just the idea that the way in which agricultural subsidies are doled out are by political influence, right? Have nothing to do with what's the appropriate use of the land. So we end up growing too much of some things and too little of others. The other, non-market, again, my point there was simply that if by market, right, we mean, right, well, but that's the problem, okay? I think that's the problem. For me, the professor needs a chalkboard, okay, but visualize, okay? Voluntary, market, civil society. They're all voluntary, but markets are about for profit, about people searching for profit. Civil society is. Well, then all I can say, first of all, I don't think the left's defining it that way. I think that's the way that classical liberals define it. Read de Tocqueville, right? I mean, de Tocqueville, writing in the 19th century, talked about civil associations in the United States and about the robustness of our voluntary sector. He didn't call those markets, right? But they're another form of voluntary organization. So I don't think it's the left that's doing that. I'm not conceding to their usage here, but I am trying to make I think it's an important rhetorical point when we talk to the left. Because if we call everything a market, if we call everything voluntary a market, all they hear is, and again, this is about rhetoric, all they hear is profits, greed, and all the things they don't like. All right? But if we can say, look, not every voluntary, we love voluntary social organizations. Some of them are corporations and firms on the marketplace who deal with consumers, but some of them are synagogues and churches and all these other things that deal with people in different kinds of ways. And I think that's an important distinction and one worth making. I don't think and I think it's one consistent with our own history. I'll leave it there.
All right. As our movement grows, we're finding anti-libertarians getting more and more creative in creating arguments against us. I'll give you one that's very trendy right now and see if you have an answer for it. And then after you answer that, I'd also, for some of us who haven't read your books, if you could tell us a little bit about some of the things that you recommend you've done, because I'm very impressed with what you have to say. I've only seen you on the YouTube, but the argument I've been getting is, well, if libertarianism is so great, why has there never been a libertarian society? And the only answers I've heard go back to Jefferson, and that argument is stale. So how would you talk to that issue?
You mean politicians actually like having power? I'm shocked, right? I mean, I think, I think there's a couple kinds of answers to that, right? One, there's lots of things that human beings think are good that we've never been able to actually put into practice, right? Number one. Number two, you can't get a libertarian society without at least some number of people thinking it's a good thing, right? And for most of the 20th century, really since the late 19th, most people haven't thought that's a good thing. More people do now than before. And we had, it wasn't, 19th century United States was no utopia. In some ways it was more libertarian than what we have now. In other ways, much less so. We tend to forget, oops, slavery, right? That's pretty important. And also rights of women issue too back then were important. But in other ways, right, people who, if you were white male, right, you were much freer then than you were now in some ways, all right? So, we can, I think, talk about those kinds of things, but the reality is that we haven't seen one because people with power are reluctant to give it up. And we, I think, as libertarians in the 20th century and now 21st, haven't been persuasive enough to generate the kind of grassroots and widespread acceptance of those ideas that will then lead to political change. That's a hard road to hoe. You could have easily asked the same question, about socialism at some point, right? If socialism's so great, why haven't we? And you could arguably still say it today, but we know why, right? Why hasn't it taken over? I think that anyone asking, there was a Michael Lind piece in the Washington Post was the first one of these, right? That asking that question just hasn't really thought carefully about political economy, right? And about the natural tendency of politicians to seek power. We had a constitution, we have one, I think, still. It had certain limits on the state, but those limits on the state will always depend upon how courts and politicians and human beings interpret those rules. So, the Constitution in some sense failed us, but it failed us not because of the Constitution per se, though could have done better, but because ideas were such that people read it in a certain sort of way and interpreted it that way. And I think that's part of the answer is that we think libertarian ideas are great. We're a small portion of the population, right? And until more people think that, we'll never see them in practice. At least, by the way, that's better than the if libertarianism is so great, why don't you move to Somalia argument, which that's a whole different one.
Hi.
Yes, sir.
Could we perhaps...
I'll answer, when I close, I'll answer your other question about,
two things. One, could we not perhaps point to the spectacular success of Hong Kong as an example of a libertarian society that seems to have worked?
Yeah.
And the other thing, my liberal friends are never more smug when they talk about the current income disparity as being the result of greedy capitalists having achieved the repeal of all these regulations that kept them in check since the New Deal. How do I come back against them?
On the first one, we can point to Hong Kong. There's a couple other things we can point to, too, that are fairly good examples. On the income inequality stuff, the best place I can point you to on this is learnliberty.org. Some mentioned seeing me on YouTube. Learnliberty.org is a project of the Institute for Humane Studies. They have now over 200 videos up there, the majority of which are about 2 to 5 minutes long. There are several on income inequality, one of which is mine, and then a later one by a guy named Sean Mulholland. If you go to that site and search income inequality, you'll find these. There's wonderful statistics there, easily explained easily. One big answer to that income inequality thing is it's not the same people every year at the top and bottom, right? The left says, oh, well, the rich got richer because the people who, in 1970, whatever, they had this percent, in 2012, they have this percent of the wealth and income. And they make it sound like all the people who were rich then are now richer here. But you know what? The people who were rich then aren't the same people who are rich now. And more importantly, the people who were poor then are not the same people who are poor now. The majority of Americans who are poor in any given year have moved up and out of poverty within 5 to 10 years. Right? And by some measures, the numbers are even more spectacular than that. So what economists talk about as income mobility or income dynamics is really important here. The other point I like to make, and I have another Learn Liberty video on Are the Poor Getting, it's on living standards, and I can't remember the exact title of that one, but talks about the way in which, and you can find some other stuff on the web by me about this too, that the way in which the poor today, measured by what poor Americans have in their homes, Americans below the poverty line today are better off than the average American was in 1971. Right? if you look at, let me just, here's a story. This is a true story. The Soviets in the 1940s decided to show the film version of The Grapes of Wrath as an anti-capitalist, propaganda, right? So they showed it in some theaters in Moscow to sort of see, look how terrible it was. These people had to go out west and starve to death, and all the terrible things that happened in The Grapes of Wrath, right? They had to pull it after a few days. You know why? Because the Russian audiences watched it and they went, whoa. Poor Americans have cars? Okay, so when we look at what poor Americans have today, certainly versus the rest of the world, but certainly where even middle-class Americans were. When I was a kid, didn't have this. Most poor Americans have one of these, right? So you can go on and on with it, with that kind of stuff. One more question, and then I'll close by talking about some of my stuff.
Yes, it seems like you can think of every one of the public policy issues that you've been speaking about. You can think of it as an equation that's going to have a number of factors.
Excuse me, this is NT right here. This is Myers-Briggs NT right here.
Associated with. And the whole thing about the factors that I place an importance on are not necessarily the same factors that someone else. We may both desire the same end result. So how do you go about recognizing that in the other person's approach to that issue? And how do you go about nudging them into perhaps reevaluating how they value the different components of that policy?
The answer to the first is something that libertarians aren't as good at as I like them to be sometimes, and that's you listen, right? You shut up for a little bit and listen and sort of hear what other people are saying and try to get inside their heads and figure out what are the factors they're putting into that equation. And then I think that's actually the easy part. The harder part is, okay, now if I can get inside their head a little bit and see what sort of values they're bringing to the table, how can I tailor my message? How, if I was a marketing guy, how can I create my brand, right, in a way that appeals to them? I mean, Lee Wrights and I were talking out in the hallway before, right? You got to know your audience, right? You got to know who you're talking to, and you got to have a sense of what they'll listen to. And I've spent 25 years in academia, so I hang around with the folks I've been talking about today, and I have a pretty good, I play anthropologist, right? I have a pretty good sense of what they will respond to, and I think listening and being attentive to them and recognize you can't use the same arguments again, for every single argument, for every single audience. You got to be able to adjust and meet people where they are. So let me say just a couple things about my own stuff. I've written 2 books, both of which are fairly technical works in economics. So the one I guess we auctioned off last night, less so, that's the Micro Foundations in Macroeconomics book, which is a book on Austrian macro, the Austrian business cycle, inflation. I think if you know a little bit of economics, you can read it. You can get it from Amazon. You can Kindle it from Amazon or get the paperback there. My daughter's off to college in a year, so please buy my books. Yeah, Northwestern, yes, most definitely, yes. Finding me other places. I write a monthly column for the Future of Freedom Foundation. I had left some of their stuff out there. I also write occasionally for the Freeman from Foundation for Economic Education. I'm on their academic board of advisors. You can catch me almost every summer at Freedom Fest, usually doing a session for a fee. On the web, Learn Liberty. I just say Google me, but there's a lot. The Learn Liberty videos, there's a bunch there, some short ones, and some longer lectures too. If you just go to YouTube and put my name in, there's a lot of stuff like this that I've done that's out there on the web. I blog at 3 different places: Bleeding Heart Libertarianism, bleedingheartlibertarians.com, also coordinationproblem.org, which is a group of Austrian economists. And then if you're interested in money and banking issues, I sometimes blog at freebanking.org. So those are places to find me. I write op-eds, which, again, if you Google me, you'll find stuff. But the single best place to follow me, as Ken said, is on Facebook. I have about 400 left before I hit 5,000, so act now. I also have a public figure page now, too, that I don't update as much, but big stuff gets there. That's the best place to follow my work, because anything I publish that's out there on the web goes right to Facebook. But if you friend me on Facebook, you have to have a high tolerance for pictures of really good food. I'm sorry to say, I'm sorry to say this one, Detroit sports teams, especially hockey ones. Yeah, Red Wings. Progressive rock music. There's a fourth one in there too, but yeah, sports music, food. That probably does it. Along with lots of this stuff too. So again, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Julie. It's been great, and good luck with the rest of the day.